Where Did the Road Go is made possible in part from our Patreons. And this month, Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, and Super Inframan. If you'd like to help us out and support the show, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now tonight's show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight we are going to do some listener stories, and I'm joined by Gwen.
Hello.
I am joined by Russ of the Snake Brothers.
That's right. What's up?
And some stranger is also joining us. I'm not sure who it is. Josh Crutchin, I think.
One of the old ones has returned from underneath a sea of packed boxes for a house and baby diapers. I've emerged.
Well, that sounds like fun.
Like a Cthulhu smelling of baby spit up.
Ah.
Well, you did make it to Adam's event.
Yeah, that was a pretty. I was in 4 time zones in the course of a week. It was pretty exhausting, but
really?
I made it.
Really?
Yeah.
How come?
Yeah. So I had a layover in LA on my way out to an audition in Idaho, and then came back to Georgia, and then 24 hours later went up to Nashville. So that was all 4 of the zones.
So can you talk about this audition?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a singer-songwriter that I work with out of Atlanta here who plays sort of prohibition, ragtime sort of music, and me and a mutual friend, probably the closest thing that I have to a boss right now because he leads most of the bands that I'm in on trumpet. So the 3 of us went up there, and it was a talent buyers convention. So you have a bunch of people in the Pacific Northwest who run theaters, and they see different acts. After they make the first cut, then they'll go to a certain location, in this case the Pacific Northwest, to see acts that they want to book at their theaters, and they coordinate together to work out block scheduling so that the acts can go from one theater to another. So these things tend to take time. I haven't heard anything back yet, and probably won't for a while. The acts won't be booked for another year, so we're just hurry up and wait right now. But it went well, as well as it could have. Let's put it that way. To fly in and do it on a borrowed instrument for me, because flying with a tuba is not cost cost efficient.
You don't have one of those collapsible ones?
Yeah, right. I wish. And then you pay overage, oversize, overweight, depending on what TSA agent you get, and then there's no guarantee that it won't get the snot kicked out of it.
Right.
At the end of the day. Yeah.
All right.
You just gotta buy a whole other ticket for the tuba and strap it into the seat next to you.
I used to do that a lot. When I'd fly out to auditions for orchestras. I'd take a horn out that way, and then I did have a flight case for back when I had an F tuba. I had a flight case for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's look at some of these listener stories. Let's start with one that is more in the Bigfoot category, I think. Is that good with everyone?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
All right. This comes from Karen. She says, I'm looking for answers as to what I experienced. I'm English, and I moved to Poland in 2011 with my husband. We live in the Tatra Mountains, a beautiful alpine area surrounded by mountains and alpine forests. We have 2 rescue dogs, one being a husky, and the other is just a mix of God knows what. Every day we take them for walks. First walk is early in the morning, 6 a.m. to 7:30 a.m., and the evening walk is around 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. We go uphill and down dale. Okay, we go uphill and down dale after 8 years, I know every forest, every trail, every nook and cranny. On occasions, either me or my husband go back to the UK to visit family, leaving the other behind to look after the dogs. On this occasion, it was my turn to stay behind while my husband went to the UK. It was November 2018, and I prepared for the evening walk. Both dogs have a high prey instinct, so are never let off lead. We have deer, bears, and wolves in the area. I've seen a lot of deer, but I've never seen any bear or wolves. I harnessed them up, put on my hat, gloves, and thermals, as it was negative 15 degrees Celsius, fairly normal temperature for this time of the year. There was no snow on the ground, but the ground was frozen with patches of ice. Due to the time of the year, I wear a head torch, as there's no street lights where I live. It's isolated and very rural. We set off walking, heading for my favorite walk, an alpine forested area that backs onto our land, where I often see deer roaming. At night, it's extra special, as you only see the deer's eyes when the light from my head torch catches them. Tonight was no exception. As we entered the forest, the dogs picked up on a scent. They began sniffing wildly along the animal trail we were walking on. At this point, I need to say that the forest is on a sloped mountainside, and we were walking horizontally on this trail. I heard the deer move from left to right ahead of me. I caught their eyes with my torchlight. I stood still, and the dogs were continuing to smell the scent on the ground. I turned my head to the right and saw 3 sets of eyes. All were deer, 1 smaller and 2 large. I could tell this by the positioning of the eyes. I could not see the animals themselves, just the eyes through the trees. I would say that the deer were around 8 feet away from me, and they were still not moving, just standing there. I then went cold inside. Next to the deer was another set of eyes. These were not deer. The eyes were the size of ping-pong balls, perfectly round. One was a vivid blue and the other was red, both having large black pupils. The dogs were reacting to the scent on the ground. I took comfort in the fact that they were reacting normally to the scent they were smelling. These eyes were to the right and higher than the deer's. As I was on a mountainside and I was looking down at the deer, I was looking straight at the blue and red eyes. This would have meant the owner of the eyes was at least 9 feet tall. I know the eyes like this as my husky's eyes look like this when they're caught in the torchlight. The difference was the size of these eyes and the intense color and clarity of the large pupils. I started to walk slowly along the animal run, looking at these eyes from the corner of my own eyes, and the eyes followed me, watching me walk away. The trail turned to the right, so I was walking away, but also downwards. The eyes remained at the same height, so I was now looking up to see them. The deer remained still, standing close to the red and blue eyes. I was now feeling panicky, but could not run, as the trail I was on was not even ground and full of twigs and branches that are easy to slip on. At this point, I need to say it was not an owl. I also catch these in my torchlight when I go out, and I have never seen any animal or bird with eyes this large and piercing. I continued to walk down the animal trail, which was now curving around, to walk beneath the deer and the strange eyes. I was now around 10 feet down from them, and they were still watching me. I never saw them move. They just seemed to be fixed in the darkness. I could not see any shape or form attached to the eyes. Having said that, I couldn't see the deer's bodies either because it was too dark, even with my head torch. I eventually cleared the forest into an open field, and I ran home. I know what I saw, and I thank God the dogs didn't react in a way that would have heightened my fears. I bought some night vision goggles and plan to take a walk this November with my husband in tow to see if we can get any answers to what I saw. So thoughts?
I don't think she said in her story how far apart the spacing was between the eyes.
No.
I'm assuming it was relatively far apart enough to where she thought the creature was quite large.
Yeah, well, 9 feet tall, I would think so, yeah.
Well, I mean, it could have been something in a tree, though, too, because you couldn't really see its body.
Right.
Not an owl, at very least. And I would think an owl's the only thing that would be up in a tree in the dark like that,
And that's why I was wondering how far apart the spacing was between the eyes, because that would give you an idea about how big the creature was.
Yeah, the first thing that I thought of was, you had said you thought it might be something of a Bigfoot story, and there are histories of large hairy hominids worldwide, but I think it's really interesting how the eye shine motif has permeated so much of the discussion in the paranormal has been associated so strongly with Bigfoot. I mean, it's interesting. When I was doing my work for this latest book with Tim and I have an entire chapter sort of dedicated to the traditions of hairy witches and some of the overlaps that are there. And there is a hairy witch among the Slavic cultures named the Zivozona, I think. is the closest I can I can get to it. But she was a old woman with a hairy body and giant breasts that were like so large she used to like beat them together to wash her clothes. And It's interesting to me how, culturally 200 to 300 years ago, this would probably have been thought of as, some sort of witch or something. The height is something that, you've got to be careful when you are looking that high that it's not an owl. If we had a little bit more information on how far apart the eyes were, that might change the story a little bit, might make it a little bit clearer. But either way, it's a very, very unsettling story.
Yeah, especially since she's used to the wildlife there. I mean, it's not like this is the first time she took a walk.
Also a good point.
Also, another thing I found was interesting was the color of the eyes.
Yeah.
Didn't she mention that her dog's eyes were the two different colors?
Well, she said, I don't know if she said the dog's eyes were different colors.
Oh, okay.
The eyes she saw were different colors.
Yeah, because she said it was familiar with her own dog, her husky. Or something along those lines.
Yeah, but I think just the way the eyes looked, being round with the pupils as they were.
Oh, okay. Because I was just
I know eyes. I know eyes like this as my husky's eyes look like this when caught in the torchlight. The difference was the size of these eyes and intensity of color and clarity of the large pupils.
Because I immediately thought, like, if it was something that was possible of mimicking the look of her dog's eyes.
Russ?
I was thinking that she's talking about, what's it called? A heterochromia, which is two different colored eyes.
Like David Bowie.
And it works. It does work with, so I'm looking this up. This says cats and dogs with a blue eye color may display both eye shine and red eye effect. White eye shine occurs in fish. Blue eye shine occurs in many mammals. Green eye shine occurs in cats, dogs, and raccoons. Red in coyotes, rodents, opossums, and birds. So that's interesting that there's one red and one blue.
Yeah.
On this, in the same. I think that because that's also it indicates what wavelengths of light it's reflecting.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that makes it interesting. You have to wonder what the vision of something that was reflecting different colors in either eye, well, how that would end up looking.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Huh. Okay. So, other than that, I mean, maybe she'll catch it again with night vision. Probably not. That's how these things go.
Yeah.
If you go out looking for it, you're not going to find it.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Anything else from anyone on this?
So I've used a lot of night vision. My boss has because we have a big orchard, and so we have to look for certain animals in the orchard at night that are eating vines or trees, and it's really easy to spot them with night vision scopes. And they show up so easily in the night vision, but you can't tell. A lot of times, you can't tell what exactly they are unless they move. So, like we have jackrabbits and deer that will basically, eat the plants that we're planting, and all I'll see out there is a blue or a white blob. Until it moves, I can't tell what it is.
Okay.
And birds, what's interesting with birds is they're difficult to see because their feathers are very insulating. So until they move, they're almost invisible even with night vision, with infrared. So.
Huh. All right. Let's see. Which one should we go for? Let's go for a less intense one here. This one coming from Matt. He said, I was at the hospital waiting while my mother was having her physical therapy session. The area where I wait for her isn't a separate room, but rather just a small alcove with a couple of couches off the main hall. The floor where these sessions are held consists mainly of patients' rooms, and as such is fairly quiet. Some days, only one or two people even walk down the hall the entire hour that I'm sitting there. Most of the time, I take advantage of the quiet, and I read, but this particular day I was tired from the long night before and decided to lay down and take a brief nap. While laying on my side, I had not yet fallen asleep, but my mind began to relax and drift when I started to hear voices. The sound of voices themselves had that curious quality of sounding both muffled and loud, like a person trying to whisper, but doing so right next to your ear. I could not make out what they were saying, but they were clearly the sound of at least two voices talking simultaneously over one another, not back and forth as in conversation. This in and of itself, while odd, didn't bother me, but what frightened me enough to sit up is when I realized I was laying on my left side. Only my right ear was exposed to the sounds of the hall, but I'm nearly deaf in that ear. Needless to say, when I sat up, the hall was empty.
Okay, I've actually had this a lot. When you get relaxed enough, I don't know what it is, but I feel like you can pick up on things a lot better, and it could even be like an auditory pareidolia, where you start to hear noises around you and they blend and your mind tries to make sense of it and they start to form words. But I've actually had that a lot where I've heard, bits and pieces of sentences and things like that. And it's a real phenomena. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that experience it. And I would find it strange that he's only experienced it once.
Yeah, I've had it a lot too. And I've noticed it mostly when if I'm extremely tired, like if I've been working a lot, and for whatever reason I'm not going to bed, but I'm sitting on my computer working on something, I'll start to notice that I'm hearing something around, and it's almost like a liminal state thing, like you're saying. You're kind of, even though I'm still awake, I should be asleep, and my body is trying to shut down, and so you get into that liminal state, and then I begin to hear what sounds like voices, but I can never understand what they're saying. So, yeah, I don't know if it's a white noise auditory thing or what, but yes, I have noticed the same thing.
In meditation practices, Aleister Crowley used to warn about things like that, calling them atmospherics. And he'd say you can literally hear things, if you get into the right state of mind, you can literally hear things talking to you, and that they're supposed to be ignored because they're just distractions upon what you're trying to do.
I've had something very similar happening with me lately on sort of two different stages. So first of all, we have a white noise machine for the boys, and on top of that, not only can we hear that, or we heard that when the boys were sleeping in our room with us, but we also have a baby monitor that puts an extra layer of filter on it now that they're out of the room. And I can't tell you how many nights over the past 9 months I've sat there and I've heard in the white noise. I'm basically creating my own EVPs in my brain, but it's interesting. The more you listen to them, you see these phrases and they start to mutate if you hear the same pattern over and over again, because this sound machine is pretty cheap. I think they used a low grade quality of sound file when they have it on there. And because of that, you get a lot of noise, but you also get a really short turnaround on how often it's looped. So you're hearing sort of the same, for lack of a better term, sound phrase over and over again, and I would almost hear entire conversations come out between these two things. And I always wondered if we think things like EVP have some sort of significance, which your mileage may vary from EVP to EVP. I personally think that there are some good EVPs, but neither here nor there. I've been experiencing a lot of that, and since then, since we've been getting ready to move here in a week, we always have had an ionizer, an air purifier, which provides white noise, but it's not repetitive white noise, so you don't get a lot of that sort of self-matrixing that you do. And we have packed it, and over the past week, anything in the house, I feel like I hear people talking all the freaking
time. I get that. I get that a lot here, but not consistently where I can say, oh, it's just the way the house is designed or something like that. It goes through spats where I can hear people talking or conversations happening in the next room, or more often music playing from the next room, and there's nothing there.
Yeah. I have a lot of different theories on that whole hearing the voices as you're getting into that liminal state while you're falling asleep, because I don't think it's just random, because that's when I picked up the robot circles statement.
Right. When Shirley heard it in her headphone at the same time. Right.
So I don't think there's nothing to it. I almost wonder if we're not picking up on the global consciousness phenomena where you're picking up on pieces of information that are floating through the air.
Well, it's certainly possible.
That's what I was going to ask. That Soraya, you mentioned that Aleister Crowley thing. Like he's saying, yeah, so it's a distraction. But what is it? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like, what does that mean? You know, like, is it a distraction in the same way that a crowd of people talking around you is a distraction? Like, ignore them, but there's still a crowd of people around you.
I would have to find where he talks about that, and I can't. I think it's in his autobiography somewhere, but I wouldn't be able to locate it like on short notice. I think I actually took a note somewhere about it because it interested me so much. I'll have to find that. So, all right. But, weird noises are, I think, somewhat common for most people like that, you know, hearing voices and stuff, especially when you're half asleep.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think that there's a lot of us who write things like that off as just being one of those things, and I think more of those are not just one of those things. I think there might be more times when they're actually significant. We just don't have all the puzzle pieces. And
I wonder, too, if, like, he said he can't really hear out of his right ear, and that was the ear that was up. But maybe that's exactly why he heard the voices, because all the sound was kind of blocked out.
Yeah, what was he really hearing with?
Yeah. All right. This one's a little more dream oriented, but interesting. Comes from Zoe. And she says, you recently podcasted about dreams and equally bizarre waking experiences. In the listener story show from October 19th, 2019, you read a listener story about seeing someone with blue and white light coming out of their eye sockets. Which is pretty unique, and I know I've never heard anyone else with that particular detail in paranormal forums. And although it gave my own experience a strange validation, I was still ready to forget about your podcast and go on with my life. I emailed my story to Linda Moulton Howe after she had a podcast on dreams, but I never heard back from her, so I kind of figured that it wasn't that special if you didn't live it. But then you specifically asked for anyone with a similar or related experience to write you, and it made me think I should try and share this again. I've thought a lot about it over the years, and I've considered emailing someone before, but just would always think that I'm being silly and my goofy dream isn't really important. Anyway, this is a dream I had every night for a year or so when I was 6 years old. I would never remember the dream in the morning or through the day, but just before bedtime I would start to remember and get scared, and just knew I didn't want to have the dream again. I had a square bedroom with a window in the middle of the south wall. I would go to sleep in my bed, and after laying there a while and being scared, I would pull the covers over my head because I'm begging what is coming to not make me look at it. I'm terrified and feel the presence of 6 short people around my bed. I have since learned of Michael Persinger and how his God helmet has helped people map this experience with different frequencies, targeted to different parts of the brain in specific sequences. He coined the term sensed presence for the experience I had, much like many children who have feared monsters under the bed or in the closet. Surely my 6-year-old brain was in that state during my experiences as a child, and yet I believe there was more going on, mostly because, for me, it never stopped there. After trembling in fear for a while, I would fall asleep. Then I would wake up in the middle of the night and be absolutely paralyzed with fear, because that is when I would always fully remember the scary dream I was about to have, and I would be completely unable to stop it. I would be completely unable to control my body, but nonetheless I would get up, out of bed, and I wanted to so badly to go back to bed and hide, but my body would just get up and stand in front of the mirror. Then I would look at my face in the mirror and pull my eye out of the socket. Then I looked at my eyeball in my hand. Then I looked at my eye socket in the mirror, and there was a bright blue and white light. It flashes, and that's the end. I finally would fall asleep or pass out, I'm not sure, and wake up the next morning none the wiser until anxiety would build at bedtime again for the next day. I may have had a few other strange things happen, but that's the one that has made me think the most. I have seen, or maybe been visited by an orb. It seems to be curious about me like a puppy. By the time I figured it out, it wasn't just sunlight reflecting off of God knows what, it casually floated off. It looked exactly like the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz when she floats around before appearing. She looks like a soap bubble with a light in the center, which is what this orb looked like. It was so bizarre how some of this stuff manifests. I remember hearing from George Knapp about dogs in trench coats smoking cigarettes at Skinwalker Ranch and getting the same chill when I recall my dream. That dream I had as a kid was one of those dreams that people talk about being more awake than even in regular life. It was hyper vivid. I feel like I could go crazy pondering it too much, but I think about how deceased people are seen in abduction experiences, and I've heard the CERN particle accelerator is somehow a nexus for things normally only considered to be fantasy. It does seem to me that all this strangeness of dreams, consciousness, quantum physics, and abduction experiences is related. I hesitated to email because it seemed like it was just a dream, and you probably get people contacting you with much juicier stories. But something made me send it tonight. I do think it's a rather unique dream, and somehow if it's heard by somebody else who had comparably weird dreams, then maybe they'll find some comfort in knowing that they aren't alone in this weirdness. And to me, that's really interesting. I'm not exactly sure what to make of it, but the fact that she's hyper aware when this is going on suggests it's more of a lucid type of experience.
It was just a dream. No, I'm kidding. I mean, it might have been just a dream, but we don't know. What I found most interesting was the removal of the eye and sort of the organic enlightenment overtones that image really has. Thinking of, Odin losing an eye and all the different traditions in the world that talk about losing physical sight so you gain, sight into other realms. I found that really interesting.
Especially for a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was also thinking about like past life experiences. Like, could that be that dream, recurring nightmarish dream, be a manifestation of a past life remembrance that very young children up to 6 or 7, have sometimes?
I think it's usually 2 or 3, but sometimes it goes as far as 6 or 7.
Yeah, I thought 6 or 7 was when they started to forget or something like that. So, but yeah, I don't know. That's what I thought of. I wonder if there's something there about a past life.
Yeah, but why would she be shooting blue light out of her eyes?
I don't know. That's a good question.
And the orb thing is interesting too. I mean, it's not surprising that something would manifest as something you're more familiar with. The Wizard of Oz sort of good witch floating around.
Yeah.
So, Gwen, any thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of information missing that I feel like would really help understand the situation better. I wonder if they felt like the orb and the dream itself were connected, and did the orb start to happen after the dream and then the dream went away? There's just so much information that I feel like could lead to better answers.
True.
Whenever there's a dream that impacts you so intensely like that, I never feel like it's a good idea to ignore it. I definitely think it's something to pay attention to, and I'm glad that she wrote the story because, maybe that was the whole point. Maybe, this is going to help somebody else along the way to understand their situation. Who knows? But I don't think that it's silly when it's impacted you enough to make you remember that many years later.
I'd also like to know how she eventually came to remember it, because she was explaining that she didn't ever remember it until it began to happen again.
Until she was going to sleep. So obviously she just had to write it down at some point.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's probably right.
Because she was still awake when she'd remember it, and then she'd remember it more and more fully as she tried to sleep. It reminds me a lot of Jeff Ritzmann's early experiences. He would have that repeated thing every night where he would find himself somewhere else, and it was hyper real and all that. So, I mean, you'd have to go back and listen. I don't remember all the details. You'd have to go back and listen to the first 3-part interview I did with Jeff Ritzmann, where he goes into detail about that. But that's exactly what it makes me think of. Just a little less intense than Jeff's experience.
Yeah, I also wonder if the dream itself isn't connected to where she was living at that point in time. How many years did she have it? Was it only at the house? If it was it something that was trying to give her information that had to do with the land or the house? There's, I think, a lot they be on.
All right, so let's move on to a horrifying Halloween story. And this one, I don't actually know who this is from. I only have an email address. That's fine. This is the same person that had her life saved by the 25-foot onyx man who appeared in her kitchen on a bright sunny day. I don't know if any of you remember that. It was definitely a strange story. And she said, anyway, it's Halloween. It's 1974. I just turned 18 on October 18th, and I was dating a guy named John. This is shortly before I was chased by a UFO, which was really fun. Not. That happened a few months. That happened a few months after this incident. We moved into this house. We had moved into this house that day, October 31st. It was my younger sister, myself, and my dad who was out of town. I will explain. I had gone to a Halloween party that night with my older sister. She did not live there. Her and I were both dressed like witches, which I found funny a while after this experience. So after the party, me and John are sitting down in my living room, and I'm dressed like a witch. I have to give you some info on the house. We had moved into this newly built house that day on Halloween. My dad had to leave town, and he called and told me and my sister to go ahead and move in, so we did. We were one of only 3 houses in the area, which was being primed to be a housing area with many houses. It was a beautiful split-level house with a large foyer that had stairs going upstairs and downstairs, a door going outside, double glass doors leading to a patio, and a door to the garage. So there was something on every wall of the foyer. We were downstairs, which was set up like an apartment. It had a kitchen, bathroom, 2 bedrooms down there, and a huge living room with an enormous fireplace. It was awesome. There were windows all around the living room, which were at ground level, and the ones we were facing faced the front door and the driveway, so if anyone had come or gone, we would have seen them. There was nothing in the room except for the love seat we sat on, a small table, and a lamp. So, it's about 2 a.m. Halloween night. We are sitting there chatting. The last thing in our minds was anything scary or Halloweenish. We were chatting about mundane things when suddenly we heard this voice come out of nowhere. It was so loud, it wasn't like a normal voice being loud. It was strangely loud. It was moaning. The first thing I thought is, where's this coming from? It seemed to come from everywhere and at the same time. And then it felt like it came from the upper corner of that area in front of us. Then I listened to what it was vocalizing. It was moaning so pathetically I can't describe it. It was so mournful, so sad, so tortured, so demonic sounding. It was hard not to notice how real the pain coming from this voice was. Whatever or whoever this was knew intense pain and suffering and left no question in your mind. Then it rose up to this laughter. This laughter was so maniacal it was frightening at how crazy the being emitting this laughter was, so mocking. Then it stopped. At the time, my little sister was in her bedroom sleeping, and no one other than John and I were in the newly built house with no neighbors near us anywhere. The closest house was one empty lot and kitty corner across a street intersection. We would not have heard anything coming from it. So me and John look at each other with saucer eyes, and we were like, what was that? I said, someone has got to be playing a prank on us. There's no explanation. It's a prank. It has to be. So John suggested we spread out and we see what we can find out. I know if this was my prank, I would want credit for it. It was good. As of this date, 2019, no one has ever taken credit for this. So we got up, and John and I went to the foyer, and I continued down the hall to my sister's room. I knocked. She didn't answer, so I opened the door anyway. She was in bed. I asked her if she knew anything about this, and she got mad and said she was sleeping and to leave her the F alone. She was really asleep. I know. I'm her sister. You know stuff about your siblings, fake or real sleep. She was sleeping for real. So I left the room, and John came downstairs in the foyer in time to meet me at the bottom of the stairs. His eyes were saucers as he told me he heard the laughing moaning again up in the foyer. I told him I would have heard it. I wasn't that far away, and from the volume it was, there's no way I would not have heard it. We were very puzzled and went back to the love seat in the living room. We sat back in the love seat and started talking again, and kind of were trying to forget about it, really, when it happened again. This time it was longer. It went from laughing to moaning twice this time. I said, this has to be a really, really good joke that somebody is playing on us. Let's search the house again in more depth. So this time we stayed together. We searched every inch of the house. We went upstairs into my dad's space. There was living room furniture up there at this point, the kitchen table and chairs in the dining room, and that was it. We searched it all, underneath the furniture, in the living room table drawers, the freezer, the oven, the fridge, the bedroom, the bathroom, off the foyer. We searched the garage, the patio out the front door. It had been snowing lightly since we had gotten home. that night, so there was a light layer of snow over the grown grass, which would have made it extremely easy to see if anyone had set foot on the property. There was not a sign of anyone in the whole yard. We searched the kitchen downstairs, the pantry room, the freezer down there, the bathroom, everywhere except my sister's room where she was sleeping, and there was nothing. We were miffed. There was an intercom system in the house, but there was no one upstairs at the main console, and the small consoles could not have made this much noise, and there wasn't one in the downstairs living room. The closest one would have been our kitchen, and that had a door that was closed at the time. It wasn't them. We even searched the main console, every inch of it, for electronics of any kind, and nothing. We headed back to the love seat discussing our findings, or lack of, I should say. We couldn't figure it out. I said it has to be a Halloween trick, and someone will take credit for this. So we went back to talking. It had to be 3 a.m. by now when it happened again. This time, though, it affected our persons. Speaking for myself, and John confirmed he felt the same way afterwards, the voice went on longer this time, up and down, up and down, up and down. During this, and immediately after it started, I felt depressed, sad, so sad I couldn't move my body sad. It literally made my skin crawl. That has never happened before or since. I didn't think it was real or possible even before it happened to me, and literally, I could not move. So much sadness and hopelessness, helplessness and despair. I knew John was going through the same thing. I saw him out of the corner of my eye. I was going to poke his leg and say, "Do you feel that?" But I realized it was not worth moving for. Nothing was worth moving. There was no purpose for anything. Everything was hopeless, helpless. My person was filled in despair in a way I have never known before or since. But I saw him barely out of the corner of my eye, just like me, sitting forward, looking sad. When it released me, he confirmed he did experience the same thing. This was too much, but it was going to get worse. We knew now that something paranormal was going on, but we didn't want to admit it out loud for fear of it being true, but we both knew this wasn't a normal occurrence. It happened again. This time, the despair increased. The hopelessness, the helplessness, the intense despair, the inability to move. It was so severe this time. It lasted longer, so long. We had tears going down our faces, but we were not crying because it wasn't worth it to cry. There was no point whatsoever to cry or do anything else. This voice was so horrible, so real, so mournful and pain-filled when it moaned, then so maniacal in its laughter. It was terrifying. It can control us like this. That was terrifying, and what did it want? Why was it doing this? It was draining us. It was so demonic sounding and loud, and knowing when it laughed, there is no way everyone in that huge house would not have heard this voice, but my sister was the only person other than John and I there, and she didn't hear a thing. It happened one more time, with more intensity every time. If there's a hell, this is what it was like, is what I thought. That is what I got from this. This is how you would feel there for all eternity, and it was chilling. It drained us of our energy. That is the only thing we could detect it did, other than frighten us practically to death. I was 18 and John was 22, and we were both horrified little kids at this point. We were exhausted, drained of our energy completely. I said I had to go to sleep now, and he didn't want to leave me, and I didn't want him to leave, so he agreed to spend the night on my couch out there alone. Our relationship had not progressed to sleeping together even after this. I went down the hall to my room, but I didn't sleep a wink. Visions of a huge creature at my door waiting for me stayed in my head until daylight, and I fell asleep from complete exhaustion. The next day, John and I talked about what happened. We both experienced the same things exactly, and neither of us found any explanation, ever.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know what to make of that. The first thing I would note is that it's a liminal period. Not only is it Halloween, which is a liminal period of the year, but they had just moved into the house on Halloween.
True. I would be willing to bet my pinky finger on my left hand that there is something in some folkloric context that has calls and cries that can cause despair. I'm just not thinking of it off the top of my head, but that sounds really familiar. That there's, you think about like, cries causing fear, and you think about like, the banshee is what I thought of.
Banshee.
But the idea of actually causing depression and then laughing at, at whoever you're talking to being in this pit of despair is not something I can quite put my finger on, but I would swear that there's something that I've heard of similar to that.
Yeah. Things also, like, the later it got, the more susceptible they were to it. So, I mean, 'cause the more tired you are, the more your defenses tend to go down.
Yeah.
So the later they stayed up, the worse things got. So that was the thing I noticed. I mean, as far as the whole phenomenon itself, it's just weird.
And it might have been feeding off of them to a degree too, and that's why it was getting more intense as it went. It was picking up on their emotions and such.
Yeah, and wearing them down too.
Yeah.
Because after each one, it's more exhausting.
And she had sent me a video about the time she got chased by a UFO, which happened just a little bit after this. I actually haven't watched that yet. I didn't even see it when it came in. I just found it before we did the show. But the fact that she was chased by a UFO just after this is, also telling. Like, there's got to be a connection there. These things don't seem separate. I feel like with her other story about the giant onyx man, coming into the room and everything, that this woman just has a very different way of perceiving the paranormal.
Yeah, I remember the onyx story. That was pretty crazy.
Yeah. I mean, because these are very unique. I don't think I've ever heard one like this. So,
yeah, myself neither, no.
All right.
The first description of the sound, when she was first describing it, and of course, this is probably because I'm trying to hear what it sounds like in my head. But I had an experience when I was a kid, basically, and we were camping out on our back porch, which was screened in, and it was the middle of the night, and the same thing started. It was a moaning noise, and it was clearly coming from outside in the woods. But it was a moaning sound, and then it progressed to this wild, ridiculous cackling that terrified me and my other two friends that were out there so bad that we jumped up out of our sleeping bags and ran inside the house. And it was a screech owl or something. They do this. They start out with it sounds just like a regular owl, very soft, and just like whoo, and then they progress to this long moaning, and then they start cackling like a crazy witch, and it's very scary. That's what I was thinking of at first, but when it came to the draining noise, I was like, that it was draining them and making them depressed. I was like, okay, that's not an owl,
right?
Or the owls are not what they see.
Well, bringing back to the Eastern European folklore, Strigoi was synonymous with screech owl and vampire, and I believe witches as well. So
there you go.
Yeah, I guess it does have vampiric things as well there. All right, let's go to this is a weird one. They labeled it Paranormal Parallel Missing in the Woods. They said, let's see, this is Claire. She says, I was living in the woods at this time with my dad. The cabins were seasonal homes, and even in the summer, we didn't have neighbors much. The closest town is over 5 miles away down the highway. It was during the off-season and was already cold since it was fall. It's easy to say I'm probably alone in these woods for miles. At this time, I was about 12. My dad had gotten a call from his boss almost an hour before sunset. He had to go into town, and I was staying home. He said it would be no longer than half an hour. Since it would be quiet in the cabin, I decided to get comfortable and read as much as I could. At some point, long enough for my body to get a little stiff, I looked up out the window. I don't know why, and I was so stuck in this book I looked up multiple times before focusing on anything outside. Eventually, I started feeling it. I don't know what, but at first there was discomfort, like static electricity was everywhere. I ignored the weird feeling as much as I could, but I had to give up reading quickly. My ears started ringing, and the dog started barking like crazy. I had a medium-sized pit and an 85-pound boxer mix. They were very good dogs, but people were afraid of them. I can't terrify some person with larger mountain dogs if he's lost or something, right? Being alone, I tried looking through all our windows, but I didn't see anyone, so I went outside. I didn't see anyone outside. There were no cars on the highway. I didn't hear someone moving through the twigs. I still had to do multiple rounds of the cabin around the cabin to make sure. The last time I did this, I came up the driveway and everything changed. I was looking into the trees on our hill our cabin is on, and there was something gray near the ground. I realized it was a face, and as he stood up, I recognized him. He stepped forward from the trees so I could see him better, and we just stared at each other. It was like we nodded to each other in a way. We definitely saw each other, and it should have been creepy, but it wasn't. His eyes were black sockets, and I'm pretty sure he was or is taller than me. Eventually, he went backwards into the trees a bit and was just gone. I know who I saw. It was this missing Boy Scout in the woods. The bad thing is the same camp has lost a kid twice a decade apart. The kid who visited me didn't make it due to admitted negligence or worse. The other kid is fine. There are many missing 411 factors in his case, too, such as a leg and negative comments about his physical health. The weird thing is when my dad got back, he said, the weird thing, as if the rest of it wasn't, when my dad got back, he said he almost didn't come home. As he was getting ready to leave, they heard a hiker was missing. A search party was being organized, so my dad was going to head with them. Then the guy just showed up, perfectly fine. He walked right into the place my dad was at. It would have been around the same time I saw the missing scout. I'm not 100% sure if the kid helped that guy, but I love to hope so. A few months later, I put together some more odd pieces. Where he came out of the woods was the opening to a path leading away from the cabin clearing. This led to our pet graveyard. On the hill he came down from, my great-grandparents' ashes are spread. Once I was woken up by a light in the clearing and saw a Native American glowing white with 2 large coyotes standing at the mound of the earth. Is someone buried there, too?
Wow.
Yep.
Again.
That's a pants cleaning moment right there. Jeez.
So what do we make of it?
Oh. Okay, I have a question. The kid came out of the forest on that trail, and did he say he didn't have eyes, like he had black eyes?
I think. Let me make sure I don't.
They were just black sockets.
His eyes were black sockets.
And and he saw a Native American with coyotes on that same.
She did.
That same area, in that same area.
Yeah, on the hill he came down. My great grandparents, and I was woken up by a light in the clearing, and saw a Native American glowing with 2 large white coyotes staring at a mound of earth.
It's dream logic again, you know. It's the currency of conversation for these sort of things.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Gwen, anything?
I don't know. It seems like it all tends to be isolated in that one area, just based on their story. So it makes me wonder if that area itself makes it easier for people to hear and try to communicate in a way.
All right, this next story comes from Tara, and she says she's ready to share something freaky that happened to me when I was about 6 years old, which is in 1983. 6 years old seems to be a common number, incidentally.
Well, you know, 7 is traditionally a very important number in a lot of different folklore. It was, I talked about this a little bit in Thieves in the Night, but generally speaking, children were most vulnerable. This is very generally speaking. You can find plenty of examples that contradict this, but generally speaking, children were most vulnerable to fairy abduction until 7. And I believe Eddie Bullard, in his alien abductions measure of a mystery, mentioned that age 14 was when a lot of abductions, again, plenty of conflicting evidence on this, but when a lot of alien abductions tended to begin. And yeah, I find that sort of interesting too. So it's almost like the precursor to the awakening, or something. That 6-year-old age going into the 7th year.
Huh. All right. She said, I was living with my parents and 3-year-old brother, a century home owned by the mining company my dad worked for. It was on a big chunk of land on the edge of town, which had 5 homes on it for workers and families. This is in a remote, debatable town in northern Ontario, Canada. Lying in bed, I awoke randomly in the middle of the night. This was common because to this day I still have the wildest dreams that usually wake me up from REM. I remained still but was looking around the room. There was a large window which cast enough of what was going on outside that I wasn't in total darkness in my room that night. All of a sudden, my bookshelf, which was in the corner of my room opposite the bed, started to move toward the bed. There was no sound while this happened. This big, heavy, solid wood bookshelf full of kids' junk, books, and collectibles started to move towards the bed. It moved effortlessly as if it were weightless. One side would inch up, then the opposite side would catch up, as if it was just one person trying to move it. It did this until it was right at the foot of my bed. It stopped at the right corner, and out of the left side of the bookcase popped a short shadow being. It walked out from behind the bookcase. It stopped at the foot of my bed and was looking at me. It was about 18 inches taller than my footboard, and all I could see was shoulders, neck, head, and hat. Yes, it was wearing a hat. Even though it was all black, I could still tell that it was 3D. I could also tell where it was facing. It started to move across the foot of my bed, then walked up the left side of the bed toward my head. It walked all the way up to my pillow head and just stared at me. When it moved, it reminded me of a pigeon walking, keeping in mind I could only make him out from the shoulders up. I was very afraid and threw the covers over my head. Even though this was so long ago, I still remember what that fear felt like at the time. It was really intense. I remember breathing shallow breaths under the covers. I was 6, so maybe I thought it wouldn't know I was there if I didn't move. This led to me falling asleep again. The next morning, my dad came in my room to wake me up with his usual soft-spoken wakey-wakey, and when he walks out again, my Rag Diane doll that was on the floor against the wall by the door got up and followed my dad out of the room. I watched it walk all gangly with long sock arms and legs right out of my room. Once out of sight, I hopped out of bed to see if it was still in the hallway, and it was gone. That was an isolated incident until 2018. Perhaps that's a story for another time. I didn't tell anyone about this until I told my dad in 2016. He believed me and asked why I didn't say anything sooner. Dissecting this, don't you agree that a lot of listeners have an isolated incident to talk about from when they were 6? There we go. That has always stood out to me. What's happening to our brains at 6 years old? I know I mentioned waking from REM sleep, and it's possible that I could have dreamt all of this, but no, I was definitely awake. I continue to have the wildest dreams today and have kept a dream journal since the 90s. I have had recurring dreams. I dreamt the details of a movie decades before it was released. Try as I might, my lucid dreams happen when they want, and my one and only out-of-body experience happened in a dream. I don't know if you've done a show on the bizarre world of REM sleep, but I would love to share some of the things I see when I'm sleeping. Okay, so, yes. And a message for Ren, who is not with us tonight. Something he said in the listener stories from May 30th, 2018. Nothing scarier than a child ghost.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I assume that the shelf was back in place when she had gotten up the next day.
That's a good question. But that does sound a bit like a Fae encounter, doesn't it? Yep. Do you think so, Josh?
It reminds me of the kobolds.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like
sorry, I was on mute. Sorry about that.
Okay, kobolds?
Yeah, they're like little mischievous like gnomes that live in their home. And if you're nice to them, they'll help you out with chores, but if you're mean to them, they'll cause mischief. So, is that the mischief that it was causing?
The kobold started out as sort of as a mine spirit in Germany. It's where we get the word cobalt from, because they were supposed to be, of a bluish color. And interestingly enough, that's sort of what one of the names that Whitley Strieber calls his visitors are kobolds. But as Gwen mentioned, they did sort of evolve into being sort of a household spirit that you would appease and take care of. My question was, remind me, was there a specific shape to the hat that was mentioned?
No.
Because you see that so often, that Hat Man thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I did just a little bit of digging a long time ago because I was trying to see if there was anything that you could get out of that. And I remembered that a lot of the hats are described as fedoras. And apparently the word fedora came from like a late 19th century French play, Fedora. And the interesting thing about that was that, if I recall correctly, the character in the play would sleep in a coffin, or the main actress of the play would actually wear the fedora and sleep in a coffin, one or the other. But that was sort of the first popular appearance of that hat wear. And it sounds vaguely occulty, but I never was able to make a real connection to that. And I think a lot of people, that's one thing that I've never seen anybody have a particularly good answer for, is why these things tend to wear hats.
Yeah, and how long have they been fedoras? I mean, did the fedora hat thing show up after the actual hat showed up in real life? You know, not real life, but just in fashion? Or because I mean, Fae encounters, they've had hats, and there's like stories of if you can steal their hat and wear it, then you can enter their domain and stuff unharmed, right?
Yes, yeah. I kind of wonder. I mean, I think a big point to be brought up in all this is, I mean, I think this further reinforces the fact that these phenomena are self-reflexive and constantly recontextualizing themselves in terms of the culture that they're in. I mean, if it's one thing that frustrates me about a lot of people who want to look at these things removed of witness testimony and stuff. I mean, if you look at, in an optimal world for a lot of these listener stories, we'd have, like, you know, the person's ancestry, their religious background, the area where they are, like the sort
history.
of the history of the area, the history of the house. You know, what sort of peoples first, especially if it's in America or in the New World rather, what sort of peoples came over. And then on top of that, you know, indigenous history as well. I think all this is just this giant soup that mixes together, and some little tangible bits tend to float to the top and get latched onto as whatever's presented to themselves. But yeah, there are some. I wouldn't say it sounds like a fairy story, but there are definitely some Fae fingerprints on that for sure.
Yeah, wouldn't it be wild if the design for the fedora came from people seeing these hats on these beings?
That'd be amazing.
I also love the
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, sort of like an inspiration loop, like a causal inspiration loop.
Yeah. I was also going to say, I love the invincible blanket defense in that story.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a good point. That always works in these stories.
Yeah.
It always works, without a doubt. It might not work in alien abduction stories, but in things that seem to be more metaphysical than aliens. Everybody knows how I feel about that. But in things that seem to be, you know, what most people would call spirits or ghosts or something, the blanket defense, you're right, it always works.
Especially for kids.
Yeah.
And it's cool it's just crazy how we can all identify with that sensation, that desire to like huddle beneath the blanket when something scary is happening. I wonder where that comes from and how come it's, you know, ubiquitous across humanity. Something very old there.
Yeah. All right.
Into us being able to control what we witness too, because if just covering up or cuddling makes this phenomena feel less scary or even go away, it also plays to the idea that we have control over what we can witness.
Right. You end your part of the co-creation if you stop looking at it.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point.
This next one is from Amanda. And from 2016. It's only 3 years old. Sorry, Amanda. But she says that I've been working on this email for a few months, ever since your roundtable on the film The Nightmare. Remember that?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
After that episode, I checked out the movie and was astonished by the content. I'd heard of the shadow people in my recent years of supernatural research, but I'd never heard or saw any research on the black blobs and black electrical beings. I, too, was haunted by the blobs and electrical beings I was haunted by them around 1998. This is my story. I was 19 years old and in love for the first time. We were two troubled kids from broken homes. Growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm a native. We were inundated with the New Age, governmental conspiracy, activism, cults, primitivism. You know the drill. There was a Vietnam vet or tie-dyed hippie on every corner ready to enlighten us. When we finally found each other, I was a rebellious high school dropout working retail. He was an anarchistic pot dealer who fathered a child at 16. In the beginning, we experienced a deep spiritual awakening with our union. The rest of the world appeared sickly and disturbed compared to our feelings for one another. We reveled in our attachment and felt we could save the planet by sharing our light. I've kept journals my entire life, and at this time I wrote consistently about my love and devotion to God, truth, and peace. But it all changed rather quickly. Several months into the relationship, I'd quit my job, and we lived part-time in the Sierra Mountains off his pot earnings. He was a snowboarder, and we spent days partying and seeking adventure. Eventually, he cheated on me with the mother of his child. It devastated me, of course, and I left him. But being an angry, confused kid from a dysfunctional family and having ostracized myself from my previous life and friends, I ended up going back to him. According to my journal then, that is when the first attacks began. I recall that we were laying in bed, not sleeping, and I sensed something in the energy of the room shift. I felt a weight slowly creeping over my body. It felt as if someone was slowly laying down on top of me, beginning at my feet and ankles. I quickly became alert and alarmed, yet too scared to move. I will interject here that I was raised Catholic, and I've had a lifelong obsession with ghosts, phenomena, etc. I've always been sensitive, curious, and artistic. My mother, a native and indigenous Pacific Islander, was also a closet fan of the occult and New Age, and fostered a lot of my interest in the subject. She also believed that I had prophetic dreams, but never really talked with me about it. But she did share it with an aunt of mine who had a penchant? Wow. This is one of those words that I could say unless I read it. Anyway, for gambling, who would always wake me up and grill me about my dreams when she would stay with us, then utilize them to bet on horses. So when I first felt the sensation, I immediately recoiled and closed my eyes tight, as I did when I was a child and felt scared of inklings. The weight slowly crept further upwards. I was laying flat on my back and seemed to settle on top of my chest. I was practically squealing, frantically telling my boyfriend that something was on top of me. I begged him to cover my body with his. The room was very dim, not completely dark. For a split second, I opened my eyes, and I could make out a form. The being on my chest appeared as total blackness, but there was a faint static movement about it, also a sort of smokiness. It appeared foreboding, and I can now recall a sort of ancientness about it, as if it was confidently, yet curiously checking me out. I didn't recall until I reread the journal entry I wrote on it that the floating through or behind above the figure was a sort of twinkling geometric shape, kind of a moving gem diamond rotating. After that, I ripped the covers up over my head. There we go. My boyfriend had laid his arm and leg over me as I kept squealing, "What is it? What is it? Get it off." He bravely put his hand into the form. I just recall him repeating, oh my God, fascinated more than afraid. He described to me that it was a sort of interacting with him, kind of how those glass balls with the electrical currents interact with your hands when you touch the glass. How the currents come to meet your fingertips, and it looks like a mini lightning phenomena. I think most people know what we're talking about there. We remained like that for what felt like a few minutes, but it could have only been one or two. I began reciting Our Father and Hail Mary prayers, eyes still closed and covers still tightly pulled over my head. My boyfriend remained fascinated yet unnerved watching it. "What is it doing now?" I'd ask between prayers. He described it as sort of a hovering above me. Our bodies weren't paralyzed, only paralyzed with fear. Other than that, we were fully awake and aware. I knew I could control my limbs if I had to, but the weight of the being was pretty much holding me down. Eventually, I felt the weight lessen, slowly, again, as when it first crept upon me. The energy began to shift back to normal in the room. My boyfriend was still watching and describing in awe and shock. I think he said that it kind of dissipated, slowly disappeared, instead of traveling back down my body or through a wall or something like that. After a while, the weight was gone, the energy was normal again, and he told me he could no longer see anything. For months, it went on like this. I've had a lifelong fear of the dark, likely due to my obsessions with spooky stuff, and usually slept with a light or a night light on whenever I'd experienced periods of fear. Leaving lights on usually kept them at bay, but like clockwork, the nights when the night lights were off, they would come. The attacks grew increasingly aggressive. I would wake with the covers torn off of me, thrown on the ground. This was very unusual, as I'd been a lifelong heavy sleeper and have never been known to have restless sleep. I'd fall asleep and wake up in the same position, usually on my back, tucking the covers around me like a burrito and hibernating like a bear, with my body temperature rising. My boyfriend and friends who'd slept over when I was younger always commented that I was like a heater during sleep. I can recall a few instances when I could actually feel the covers torn off of me and I'd immediately awaken. My boyfriend would wake up suddenly after me saying, "What the hell?" and find me sitting upright in bed equally as startled. There was never anyone else in the room and the door was always locked. Another aggressive instance occurred when I awoke once in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I was unclothed and sitting on the toilet when suddenly I felt scratched on my back. It felt piercing, like a sort of blade or shard. I quickly jumped up, ran back into the bedroom, and awoke my boyfriend. He saw, I think, 3 long, thin scratches on my back. After a while, I conjured the courage to go back to the bathroom and look in the mirror, and sure enough, the scratches were visible to me as well. Not deep, but deep enough to faintly draw tiny droplets of blood to the surface. I believe they disappeared by morning or the next day. The attacks of the black weight on my body were the most regular. After the first time, I never took another good look at the beings, but they varied between the black electrical beings and black blob figures. They mainly occurred when I was with my boyfriend and sometimes when I was alone. Needless to say, after the attacks began, our relationship devolved into darkness and despair. My journal entries also reflect this, as the entries prior to the attacks were filled with light, love, and wonder. They quickly became dark, rage-filled, and suicidal. My boyfriend admitted to me he'd secretly been using heroin for a few months and was now hooked. Me, being a cigarette and pot addict for several years by then, demanded he let me try it. After a few weeks of recreational use, I was hooked as well. Our lives went completely downhill from there. Rejection from our friends and family, homelessness, abuse, trouble with the law, the usual story followed. But the attacks stopped completely. After a few years and a possible near-death experience, I finally pulled myself out of it, got help, got clean, got rid of the boyfriend, and haven't touched or even dreamt of touching heroin since 2001. The last instance I can recall of even sensing the beings was in the late summer of 2001. I was 6 months clean. I'd had some considerable clean time the year prior to that, but relapsed for a few months before beginning again, and had a new boyfriend who was also clean. We were having some problems and arguing one night in bed, and I could feel the energy shift and sense them wanting to enter. I quickly tried to ground myself and ward them off with prayers again when I had sort of an epiphany in that moment. It occurred to me that I was creating them, or creating a space for them. With my feelings of despair and anger, it seemed almost a sort of gateway that I was opening, or perhaps the energy I was emitting that became form. After that instance, I viewed the phenomena like that for years, that if I didn't feed it, they wouldn't materialize. I've lived in fear like that for many years, sensing on some level that they are there lying in wait. I've tried to tell several people in my life about it before. Some told me I was nuts, watched too many movies. One gal even told others I worshiped the devil. But no one understood or related to it or seemed to take it seriously. I, of course, continued my studies of the supernatural and the occult. The past few years have been my most prolific. When I came across your show in the Nightmare episode and film is when I finally began to really dig this up. As I said, I've been trying to write this email for months but couldn't complete it until now. I was still terrified, worried what I might call them back by breathing life into the subject. But I feel more confident now, especially since I've been following your work on it. You guys have helped me dissect, and these are my theories. 1, it's a tulpa or poltergeist. I haven't researched them much, but when I hear the term and concept, it immediately resonates with me. I think it's because it seems similar to my earlier theory of how our strong emotions can facilitate it. It also brings me back to the very first negative entity experience when I was 15 or 16 years old. I'd had a huge fight with my older sister one night, And the same night I awoke to something foreboding in my bedroom. I was half asleep and couldn't see anything, but I felt a dark presence in the room who wanted to harm. A strong no welled up in me from my being, and I fell back to sleep. Later I told my mother what happened, and she admitted to me a similar experience she had when my older brother was a baby. My sister was about 8 years old, and my brother, a newborn, was sleeping in his crib in my parents' bedroom. My mother was awoken by a negative force in the room, and I think she saw a dark form over his crib. She also welled up with a firm no and fell back asleep. She said she thought that it was my sister's anger or jealousy towards the new baby that perhaps helped to create it. This likely helped form my Topa-esque theory about the energy materializing. Not saying my sister is evil or anything like that. I love her dearly and fiercely protect her protect her heart of gold, but I think she's also sensitive, perhaps psychic. She read my future late one night when she was visiting and home from college. At the time, she was devouring the Seth Speaks material. Everything she said that night has come true except for one or two things, yet. The second thing would be dark forces. The way that the beings felt, the senses I experienced, fear, repulsion, and the way my life devolved directly after the attacks leads me to not rule out that they were demonic. I've thought that perhaps my pain and despair about the drama with my first boyfriend opened some gateway, sent some call out to them, alerting them that I was there as a weak victim ripe for the taking. I've wondered if that's why they would sit on top of me like they were feeding, draining, or attaching themselves. By inducing more fear, discomfort, lack of sleep was their tactic, and truly weakening to me to a state of near death so they could do their thing or whatever entities like that may seek. And the third option would be spirit guides. This is my most recent notion, and one you've helped me reach. I think you recently started speaking of this. If I let go of the Catholic scary movie dogma and ideals and open my mind that maybe helpful guides may not always appear as fluffy butterflies and rainbows, then this could easily make sense. If they appeared directly before my life took a turn for the worse, perhaps they were serving as a warning. Perhaps they were trying to scare the hell out of me to get me to get away from the boyfriend, and honestly trying to save me from self-destruction, pain, and the like. I find it curious that just last night I came across the Tahiti paintings of Paul Gauguin. Anyone?
Gauguin?
I don't know him.
Gauguin. Yeah, something like that. In them, he painted dark beings, usually hovering around people as they sleep and are in other states of unawareness. He called them spirits or spirits of the dead, and they don't appear as harmful or demonic. It resonated with me because my current notion of the entities as helpful guides, and also because of my Polynesian ancestry. I thought that was interesting. Something else I just recalled that might be interesting is the area I grew up in had a naval weapons station in town. Growing up, we'd always heard stories of military bunkers in the hills and underground tunnels and cities beneath our feet. Also, part of our history was the Port Chicago explosion of 1944 and continued nuclear waste cleanup. I believe in the 90s we had 13 refineries in the Bay Area alone. And we grew up under a mountain called Mount Diablo. Even my high school mascot was a devil. When I was homeless and on heroin, I mainly slept under a tree in an isolated park at the foothills of the mountain. Thought that might be some fun, Paulides-esque notions. I'm also mainly German ancestry. All right, so that was long, but I think very interesting, honestly. And I think the poltergeist thing is probably spot on, more or less. I mean, it seems like it when she went back to the boyfriend, she knew she shouldn't, and that was being put out there by this, she was putting that negative energy out instead of expressing it other ways until she got into heroin, in which case that's how that got expressed from that point on, and that's why that stuff stopped. Thoughts, guys? Girl? People?
I can relate to this so well. I really think that what she was experiencing was an expression of her own emotional distress. Mm-hmm. And the heroin itself it dampers that ability to outwardly express that in a poltergeist type of phenomena. For a long time, I tried to find ways to, stop the occurrences from happening in different ways. And, when you put things in your body like that, it will prevent you from being able to experience things like that as much. But I think that she needs to let go of her fear of that whole situation, because when fear breeds fear, negativity breeds negativity. And when you're expecting a fearful type of occurrence, that's exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah. And especially when you have a lot of negative emotion pent up.
Right. I think that there might be a lot of things that she personally needs to deal with on an emotional level. And I think that she needs to look at things in a whole other way. And I think that the experiences and the phenomena that she's going to have happen to her is going to change.
And I think she's dead on about the substance abuse angle. I mean, you hear this very, very commonly. And, I think there's a reason. There's an actual significant reason why people refer to their vices or their, things that'll catch up to them as their demons. And we've always, consistently referred to, alcohol as spirit. So I think that this is all I think that those names that we sort of view as more superstitious or antiquated, actually are a lot more insightful than we give them credit for.
Yeah. It also sounds like this sensitivity and maybe ability to manifest runs in the family, maybe.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that bring this stuff together. And location may have been one of it, but it sounds like, it really kicked off with her doing something she shouldn't have done. So, you could see it as a guide in that sense, too. Even if she was projecting, it was kind of telling her this is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. Also, the geometric aspect of that was interesting.
And it wasn't saying in her head because he saw it too.
Right. I also liked his response. Yeah. When a dark being comes into the bedroom, what do you do? Touch it. It's a great idea.
That's what I would do.
Yeah.
Hey, what's that?
Yeah. Let's touch it. See what happens.
What the gold is, or the money is.
What was that?
I said, or ask it where the money is.
Oh, right. Yeah. There you go.
So, well, that's another story. We'll do a short Patreon segment after this, and I'll tell that story for patrons. So I wish I had gotten this 2 years ago. Nope. How long ago was that one? That one, yeah. So almost exactly 3 years ago, October 2016. So I apologize for taking so long to get to this. This was a really interesting one. And the thing on the chest is such a common folklore thing, isn't it, Josh?
The thing on the chest?
Yeah.
Yeah, according to what particular culture you're in, it was explained differently. So we're all familiar with the idea of the old hag. But there are actually a variety of other things that in different cultures that were supposed to cause sleep paralysis. For example, again, fairy folk, piskies in Cornwall, incubi and succubi in early Christian thought. There was actually an Irish variant called the Tromluia, or I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but it was still like this giant bird leg that would just press on your chest. There's no shortage of all sorts of different things. And I think that they're all describing an actual medical, not condition, but an actual medical phenomena. But I think that the reason for that phenomena might have, in some cases, a supernatural answer. I think too often people mistake the room for the key, if that makes any sense, or the door for the key.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this? That's silence. I'm taking silence as no.
I had one, but
lost
the
it?
giant bird leg just totally distracted me. I can't remember what it is now.
The fact that it was a geometric sort of shape, like a gem or a diamond rotating, is very strange. Usually you get more of an amorphous sort of thing. That kind of has a unique aspect to it.
But, common... she could have been describing a UFO.
exactly.
We're talking about,
and of course she pulled the covers over her head, but this time it didn't go away. Maybe because her boyfriend still saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was somebody still contributing to the co-creation, I guess.
Right.
So, well, I'm glad she's doing better now, and was able to write us this. So it looks like she's turned her life around, and that's what you want. All right. I guess that's all for listener stories for right now. Where can people find you, Russ?
People can find me and my brother, Kyle, at brothersoftheserpent.com. We have a podcast that focuses on ancient mysteries, mostly pyramids and bad dad jokes is what we do.
and Joshua, is it Crutchin? Is that your last name?
Yeah, it's better than people calling me Kuchin, which happens too often. JoshuaCutchin.com. I think no appearances on at any conferences lately. You might catch a rerun of my Ancient Aliens episode where I spoke for a total of maybe 20 seconds.
Ooh.
That should be in circulation. My book with Tim Renner is I'm pushing him to have it out by the end of the year, so we'll see what happens.
Nice. And Gwen?
A simple Facebook page, Uncharted Paracryptid Studies.
All right. Well, thank you all. This has been very interesting as usual.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
And I'm going to take a moment to give a shout out to my Patreons. All of you are awesome, and you help make this a thing, make it real. And for those of you pledging $10 or more, special shout out to Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, Super Inframan, Tim, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Nadine, Damian Tallman, Edu Kamahort, Elliot Keegan, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Maria, Nate Syria, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cisternos, Ray Benedetto, Lindsay Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris is a hot dog a sandwich, and Carla Mahoney. I thank you all so very much. All right. You may have heard some audio artifacts in that show, and I apologize if that's the case. Russ's headset was going bad, and it was causing enormous amounts of static. I was able to filter 90% of it out, maybe 95%, until it started getting really bad. So that's what you were hearing if you were hearing weird static or any weird after effects from removing the noise. They weren't EVPs or weird echoes. It was just the artifacts left over from removing noise. All right. After we did this, Amanda, who had the story there in the middle, said she wanted to add something that she forgot to in the email that might be pertinent. And she said, the counselors I worked with in rehab that I told of the hauntings all chalked it up to drug-induced hallucinations. They also surmised I suffered from codependency issues and mild PTSD. A counselor I worked with in 2012 after my father died surmised the same and added symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder. Now, that is something that they're going to say. And in some cases, they may be right. She did get addicted to heroin, so after that point, could be more, a combination of all these things. But when you're just smoking pot, and that's not going to give you experiences like this. It's not going to give you hallucinations like this. I'm not even sure that that heroin would, but I can't say 100% on that one. So any mental health person you go to, I mean, that's going to be the standard line, is that these were hallucinations, especially if you were addicted to drugs. In some cases, it may be the case. In others, it's not. I mean, there's no real way we can tell the difference there, other than the fact that those stories do have a lot in common with other people who have had similar experiences. So, in the end, you can take it as you will. Also, we got put into a blog called Top 15 Paranormal Podcasts You Must Follow in 2019. And this can be found at blog.feedspot.com/paranormal_podcasts. I'll toss it on the notes for the show as well. And we're in good company there. Jim Harold, Mysterious Universe and such. And for some reason, Welcome to Night Vale, which I'm not totally sure quite fits. I mean, I guess they deal with the paranormal in a fictional and ridiculous way. Also, of the top 15, there are actually 19 entries. But that's fine. That's it's pretty cool. And anytime we get mentioned in something like this, I appreciate it. So thank you. And of course, if you have any stories you'd like to submit, have us talk about it on the air, or if you just want to submit it privately and ask me what I think of it, you can do so at stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. And it doesn't have to be something that's full of high strangeness and weirdness. If you have a story, share it with us. All right, we're going to take you out with some Cactus Cathedral. This is Cabin 28, and you can find them on Bandcamp, and some live performances on my other show, The Last Exit for the Lost. So, coming off of Hauntings and Hardships, Cabin 28. We'll see you next time.